The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So lovely to see you all on this beautiful autumn morning. The title of today's talk is Never Give Up. And I'm going to start by reading a short quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I've had this little card / bookmark in my room for a number of years. So it says, never give up. No matter what is going on, never give up. Develop the heart. Too much energy in your country is spent developing the mind instead of the heart. Develop the heart. Be compassionate. Not just to your friends, but to everyone. Be compassionate. Work for peace in your heart and in the world. Work for peace, and I say again, never give up. No matter what is happening, no matter what is going on around you, never give up. So that's what inspired the talk, and I'm not going to, just speak about this, but I'm going to talk about never give up. That was the point. So like I said, I've had this quote for, a number of years, and recently, at one of our monks' teas, someone had mentioned again the value of simply going on in our training and, not giving up no matter what. And I think, sometimes when we come to this practice in the early days, if we're not completely terrified when we first get here, everything can be really exciting. We get to meditate with others and work in the kitchen or stack wood. We might find for the first time in our lives, something is clicking, things make sense. Maybe there's a stillness there that we haven't experienced before. I myself, I found myself driving 700 miles one way, 3 separate times in the course of 4 months just to be here. And, that's over 4,000 miles. And that was a measure of my excitement and motivation in the early days. And I think most of us know that starting the practice and keeping the practice up are a different matter. Because after that first flush of excitement, it can seem like, many obstacles are thrown onto the path. So how do we train in the midst of these obstacles? Especially the obstacles of busyness, illness, family, work, and difficult mind states. So today I'd like to talk about some ways of not giving up on ourselves and our training, and the role of the will in our training. And luckily, I have a pretty good selection of personal anecdotes to pull from, on wanting to give up at various times in my life, and what I've learned, so this seemed like a pretty good fit. In today's talk, I'll also pull from the Pali Canon to look more closely at what the Buddha advised on this matter. So on the way down to the Abbey, on my very first retreat here at the Abbey, on the way down to my very first retreat here at the Abbey, I'll start by saying that, I was pretty terrified. And spoiler, it did get better. But it definitely wasn't, just rainbows and, blissful meditation from the start. Midway, on our 700-mile drive, we stopped at one of the smaller temples. And while we were there, we'd been in the backyard, and I decided, there were some temple animals, and If you don't know, I am a real cat person, and there was this extremely handsome temple cat named Mr. B, and I saw him up the stairs. I thought, oh great, I'm gonna go pet Mr. B. So I go climbing up the back stairs to see Mr. B, and as I get to the top of the stairs, I was also met by the sight of the temple dog, Meta. She's a German Shepherd, and I see her through the screen door. And for those who don't already know, Metta translates as loving kindness. And all of a sudden I hear, lots of barking, and she's charging, out the door. And I was like, the hair standing on, on the back of my neck. I was like, uh-oh. So moving as quickly down the stairs as I could, I thought, something in my brain was like, protect your face, protect your hands. And so, I'm turning around. I thought, this is not good. She's coming for me, right? And kept turning, trying to get away from her mouth. But, she lunges and she bites me on the leg. And so, it wasn't a bad bite because I'd been wearing jeans, luckily, but let me tell you, if you haven't been chased by a German Shepherd, it's definitely in the top 10 of the most terrifying moments of my life. And, for me, it made me want to get back in the car, turn it around, and go back home, because I thought, this is, I thought, this is not good. And in case you were wondering, I think in this case, Metta was an aspirational name. Something it was hope she'd grow into. I did think it was quite ironic at the time. I'd been bitten by a dog named Loving Kindness. Because, in the past, especially as a child and a teenager, my tendency had been to give up when things were difficult. And I'm really glad I didn't turn the car around and go home, or see this as some kind of bad omen. I don't believe in omens anyways, and perpetuate this pattern, because I never, would have known what I would have found here, the new direction in my life, and actually the peace of heart. If I hadn't picked myself up, after stumbling at the first hurdle. Because for me, it was really just the fear that was getting in the way. It was the fear telling me, I couldn't do it. It was too hard. It was too scary. It was too much of an unknown. Better to quit while you're ahead. But despite giving up on, many things out of fear, there was still a kind of tenacity there, which I didn't see back then, but I can see in retrospect. It stopped me, for example, from going on a bouldering and hiking trip at nighttime that I'd been invited to that involved alcohol. And, I thought, this is crazy. I thought, no way. Perhaps that was more of a, simply self-preservation in that instance. But there were times like these where I couldn't be swayed, or I'd simply keep on going, no matter how difficult it was at the moment. And I couldn't really see that in myself at the time. And after that first flush of excitement for training, or an initial honeymoon period, sometimes it can feel like training suddenly becomes very difficult. Perhaps it's because the arising of difficult memories, or maybe we see our past mistakes, and now all of a sudden, we have the space to look at these things head on without the filters, of our toolbox of distractions. Maybe our life circumstances change. We lose our job, or a loved one, or our health goes south. We find that all of a sudden, we don't have any time to meditate formally anymore in the mornings or evenings. Sometimes, we might become discouraged because of a perceived lack of progress and training. Maybe, we think we might be doing something wrong because things are getting harder, not easier. Maybe we're angrier instead of, more peaceful like we expected. So what would I say in response to this? That all of these things are completely normal, and if you've thought any of these things, you aren't alone by a long shot. And don't give up. Over 2,500 years ago, the Buddha, advised his disciples, both lay and monastic, on these very challenges. So this isn't a new issue. In the Kusita Arabhavatu Sutra, this is from the Pali Canon, which translates as the grounds for laziness and the arousal of energy sutra. The Buddha gives advice on how to practice when we feel like life is getting in the way. So I'm going to read here a short passage. There is the case where a monk has done some work. The thought occurs to him, I have done some work. Now that I have done work, my body is tired. Why don't I lie down? So he lies down. He doesn't make an effort for the attaining of the as yet unattained, the reaching of the as yet unreached, the realization of the as yet unrealized. This is the second ground for laziness. So here's another example. Then there is the case where a monk comes down with a slight illness. The thought occurs to him, I have come down with a slight illness. There's a need to lie down. So he lies down. He doesn't make an effort for the attaining of the as yet unattained, etc. This is the seventh ground for laziness. So the Buddha gives 8 grounds for laziness, and then he gives 8 solutions. And the examples that the Buddha uses in this sutra include essentially doing work, going on a journey, going on alms round in town, becoming ill and recovering from illness, which, I think isn't so different from today and the obstacles that get in the way of us doing the practice. So paid work and the work we do at home, traveling and commuting, grocery shopping, preparing food and other errands, illness, doctor's visits, perhaps tending to the sick, family members too. What I think is so telling here is that the Buddha is, specifically instructing the monks, meaning, this can be an issue for anyone on the path. Anyone could find themselves discouraged. So the Buddha continues, with his prescription for the situation. So the Buddha says, there's the case where a monk has some work to do. The thought occurs to him, I will have to do this work. But when I am doing this work, it will not be easy to attend to the Buddha's message. Why don't I make an effort beforehand for the attaining of the as yet unattained, the reaching of the as yet unreached, the realization of the as yet unrealized? So he makes an effort for the attaining of the as yet unattained, the reaching of the as yet unreached, the realization of the as yet unrealized. This is the first ground for the arousal of energy. So we'll skip ahead again. The Buddha continues. Then there's the case where a monk comes down with a slight illness. The thought occurs to him, I have come down with a slight illness. Now there's the possibility that it could get worse. Why don't I make an effort beforehand for the attaining of the as yet unattained, the reaching of the as yet unreached, etc. So he makes an effort for the attaining of the as yet unattained, the reaching of the as yet unreached, etc. This is the seventh ground for the arousal of energy. And in every case that the Buddha sets out, the conditions aren't ideal, what he calls attending to the Buddha's message. Yet in every circumstance, the answer is exactly the same. The prescription is exactly the same. the Buddha advises his monks and us, that we can make an effort beforehand for the attaining of the as yet unattained, etc. And, when I read this, my interpretation is that we don't have to wait until we're in whatever circumstance we find ourselves difficult, whatever circumstance we find difficult to train in. We just start now, i.e. beforehand, as the Buddha calls it. And I think we already know this, but somehow we might doubt the merit of practicing outside of our formal sitting place, that somehow, formal sitting is what really counts. And yes, formal meditation is very important to our practice, the foundation, but so is taking our meditation into, so is taking our practice off the cushion into daily life. And, just as in former days, 2,500 years ago, there will never be ideal conditions to practice. So it's up to us to take the practice into what we do. When I was a layperson, I started to meditate on the edge of my bed, when I got up in the morning before going to work, even if it was just 5 minutes or 2 minutes. After I read this exact advice that Reverend Master Jiyu gave to a busy mother. And when I get in the car, I'd play morning service and chant the scriptures on my way to work. I just couldn't make it work to meditate 20 or 30 minutes each morning when I got up. So I got into a routine of doing this, and it completely changed things for me. It pointed me to the important matter each morning and helped me focus on what was truly important that day. And this was really a wise way of helping myself in conditions that weren't ideal. And we can find these ways and put them into practice if we're willing to let go of our ideals. We can ask ourselves, what are we holding on to that's getting in the way? Because I think in training there will always be periods of light and darkness, and we can't have one without the other. So if there's a period of light in the beginning, followed by a period of darkness, or maybe even a long period of darkness, it can be very discouraging, or we might, want to give up and try something different. And knowing exactly what that's like, whether from despondency or health issues, losing a loved one, being on the receiving end of blame, anger, and jealousy, or feeling like things are unfair. There have been moments where I've thought, maybe I should go back to teaching or open a bakery or, In my first couple of years of monastic life, I repeatedly dreamt I was working in a bakery, which tells you a little about my overall level of distress at times. That dream has since passed, many years ago. And, the Buddha shows us, with his examples in the Kusita Arabhavatu Sutra, that we can train with any conditions that we might find ourselves. And yet we often struggle against this truth, when faced with new circumstances. Maybe we might wonder, how can we train, when we've been physically strong in the not so distant past, and all of a sudden, we can't go to the meditation periods or sit cross-legged on the floor anymore. Or perhaps you're used to stacking wood when you come and now you need to rest in the afternoon instead. How is this practicing? Maybe there isn't any comfortable position to be in for formal meditation. Everything hurts. How are we supposed to do our training then? So I'm going to read another short section from a sutra for you. And I know many of you will be familiar with this specific teaching. So it's from the Sachita Sutra from the Pali Canon, and the title translates as one's own mind. So to give you a bit of an introduction, because I don't want to read the whole thing, the Buddha's speaking here about the importance of reading one's own mind, or training oneself to be aware of one's own mind and thoughts. So the Buddha says, if on examination a monk knows, I usually remain covetous with thoughts of ill will, overcome by sloth and drowsiness, restless, uncertain, angry with soiled thoughts, with my body aroused, lazy or unconcentrated, then he should put forth extra desire, effort, diligence, endeavor, relentlessness, mindfulness, and alertness for the abandoning of those very same evil, unskillful qualities. Just as when a person whose turban or head was on fire would put forth extra desire, effort, diligence, etc., etc., for the abandoning of those very same evil, unskillful qualities. But if on examination a monk knows, I usually remain uncovetous, without thoughts of ill will, free of sloth and drowsiness, not restless, gone beyond uncertainty, not angry, with unsoiled thoughts, with my body unaroused, with persistence aroused and concentrated, then his duty is to make an effort in maintaining those very same skillful qualities to a higher degree. Of course, keep in mind here that this teaching was specifically given to the monks at the time. But what I think is important here, that I wanted to bring up specifically, is that training is endless, and there's never going to be a time, where we're free from making this effort, from going on in training, but we can do it, and we can make progress in knowing, what we're doing with our minds. By training ourselves to be aware of our thoughts and in keeping the precepts with the same diligence and effort, to put out the flames as if our hair were on fire. That's the effort the Buddha is talking about here. And the Buddha is pointing here to the way to true peace and freedom. Instead of thinking that somehow a great spiritual experience will take away our suffering, the Buddha is showing us here that the application of the will, the correct use of the will or vigor to train ourselves, to do something about ourselves, and the suffering we're creating for ourselves and others. And of course, it can be frightening, to look at what, our mind is doing. Because, once we're aware of our own thoughts, and especially our unskillful thoughts, I know it becomes much harder to blame others for our difficult mind states. But on the other hand, when we're aware of what's going on in our own mind, and we have no one else to blame, there's an incredible freedom here. Our happiness or contentment no longer depends on the moods of others, on whether someone has remembered or forgotten our birthday, and our lives are no longer controlled as if by some unseen force, because we have a choice. We can train ourselves to watch what our mind is doing. We can train ourselves to keep the precepts as best we can. And we can train within all conditions, no matter what obstacles are put in our way, no matter who we are, because there's something much stronger, much more tenacious within, the iron being within all of us, whether we know it or not. As the Dalai Lama said, never give up, no matter what is going on, never give up. And that's it. Thank you very much.